Have you ever looked at a map and wondered why some countries are just richer than others? It seems like a simple question, but the answer is surprisingly complex. Take Germany, for example. It has a population of about 84 million people. Now compare that to Indonesia, a nation with nearly 280 million people. Indonesia has more hands, more voices, and more land. Yet, Germany's economy is significantly larger. Why? Why does a smaller population often command a much bigger slice of the world's wealth? To solve this mystery, economists use a specific yardstick, a heartbeat monitor for a nation's health. We call it GDP, Gross Domestic Product. You see these three letters in every news headline, every political debate, and every financial report. It is the number that can win or lose an election. It can trigger a global panic or spark a decade of prosperity. But what is it really? Is it just a pile of money sitting in a vault? Not exactly. Over the next 30 minutes, we are going to pull back the curtain on this massive economic engine. We'll break down exactly how we calculate the value of an entire nation. We will explore the different ways to measure it, the difference between real growth and inflationary illusions, and why $100 in New York doesn't buy the same life as $100 in Hanoi. We'll also look at the dark side, the things GDP misses, and the ways it can be used to hide the truth. Finally, we'll look at the blueprint for growth. How do nations actually climb the ladder from poverty to power? Let's start at the very beginning. Part 1. What is GDP really? If we want to understand the soul of an economy, we have to start with the name itself, gross domestic product. Let's take those one by one. Gross simply means the total. Before you take anything away, before you account for wear and tear or taxes, it is the raw, unfiltered sum of everything produced. Domestic tells us where the action happens. It's about the soil, the borders. It doesn't matter who owns the company. It only matters where the factory is standing. And product? That refers to the goods and services. Everything from a loaf of bread to a legal consultation, from a smartphone to a haircut. But there is a golden rule in GDP, a rule that prevents the numbers from spinning out of control. We call it the final goods rule. This is vital. To understand it, imagine a simple loaf of bread at your local bakery. First, a farmer grows wheat. He sells that wheat to a miller for $1. Does that $1 count toward GDP? Hold on. The miller then grinds that wheat into flour and sells it to a baker for $2. Then, the baker uses that flour to bake a fresh sourdough loaf, which he sells to you for $5. If we just added up every transaction, we would count $1 plus $2 plus $5. That's $8. But that would be a lie. Why? Because the price of the bread already includes the price of the flour, and the price of the flour already includes the price of the wheat. If we counted all of them, we would be double counting the wheat over and over again. To keep things honest, GDP only looks at the final product, the $5 loaf of bread. That is the true value added to the economy. Now, let's talk about those borders again. This is where people often get confused. Think about a massive Samsung factory located in Vietnam. Samsung is a South Korean giant. The profits eventually flow back to Seoul. But because that factory is physically located in Bac Ninh or Thai Nguyen, every single smartphone that rolls off that assembly line counts toward the GDP of Vietnam. Why? Because that factory uses Vietnamese electricity. It employs Vietnamese workers. It uses Vietnamese roads and infrastructure. GDP is a measure of the activity happening within a specific geography. It answers the question, how much work is being done on this piece of land? It doesn't care about the passport of the CEO. It cares about where the machines are humming. This distinction is what makes GDP a domestic measure. It's a snapshot of the energy and output contained within a country's borders, regardless of who owns the keys to the kingdom. Part 2. 3 ways to measure the pulse. If you were to ask 3 different people how to measure the wealth of a country, you might get 3 different answers. One person might look at what the country makes. Another might look at what everyone spends. A third might look at how much everyone earns. The beauty of economics is that in a perfect world, all 3 of these views should lead you to the exact same number. Let's break down these 3 perspectives, starting with the most common one you'll hear in news reports. The expenditure approach, where the money goes. This is the most famous way to calculate GDP. It's based on a simple idea. If someone produced it, someone else had to buy it. We use a classic formula for this, C plus I plus G plus XM. It sounds like high school algebra, but it's actually a map of human behavior. First, there is C for consumption. This is the biggest piece of the pie. It's you buying a cup of coffee, your neighbor paying for a haircut, or a family buying a new refrigerator. It's the everyday spending of millions of households. If people are confident, C goes up. If they are scared and saving their pennies, GDP stalls. Next is I for investment. This isn't about buying stocks or bonds. In GDP terms, investment means businesses spending money to grow. It's a tech company buying new servers. It's a construction firm building a new apartment complex. It's a factory buying a robotic arm. This is the seed money for future growth. Then, we have G for government spending. This is everything the state buys to keep the country running. It's the money spent on paving roads, paying teachers, and equipping the military. It does not include things like Social Security or welfare checks because those are just transfers of money, not the purchase of a new product. Finally, we look at net exports, or XM. X is exports, the stuff we make and sell to the world. M is imports, the stuff we buy from overseas. We subtract imports because that money is leaving our borders to support someone else's GDP. If a country sells more than it buys, it has a trade surplus, which adds a boost to the final GDP number. The output and income approaches. But what if we looked at it from a different angle? The output method, or the production approach, focuses on value added. Instead of looking at the final price tag, we look at every step of the journey. We take the value of the goods produced and subtract the cost of the materials used to make them. It's like measuring the effort added at every stage of the supply chain. If a factory takes raw steel and turns it into a car frame, the value they added is the car frame's price minus the steel's cost. Sum up every bit of value added across the whole country, and you get GDP. Then there is the income method. This follows the money into people's pockets. Every dollar spent on a product eventually becomes someone's income. It covers wages paid to workers, rent paid to landowners, interest paid to lenders, and profit kept by business owners. When you add up everyone's paycheck and every company's profit, you arrive at that same total. Bringing it all together. To see how these 3 align, let's go back to our bakery. Output. The miller adds $1 of value. The baker adds 3 of value. Total, $4. Expenditure. You walk in and spend $5 on a loaf, but we subtract the $1 for the imported seeds used. Total, $4. Income. The baker pays his staff $2 in wages, pays $1 in rent, and keeps $1 in profit. Total, $4. No matter which path you take, you end up at the same destination. This triple check system is what gives economists confidence that the numbers are real. But as we're about to see, just because the numbers match doesn't mean they're telling the whole truth, especially when prices start to rise. Part 3, Nominal versus Real GDP, the Inflation Illusion. Numbers can be deceiving. In the world of finance, they often play tricks on us. To understand why, we have to talk about the inflation illusion. This is the difference between looking at the price tag and looking at the actual value of what you're holding in your hand. Imagine a small island nation that only produces one thing: sourdough bread. In the year 2024, the island produces 10 loaves of bread. Each loaf sells for $3. If you calculate the GDP for that year, it's simple math. 10 multiplied by 3. The GDP is $30. Now, let's fast forward to 2025. The bakers are still working just as hard, and they produce the exact same amount, 10 loaves of bread. But something has changed in the world. Prices have gone up. Now, each loaf sells for $4. If you look at the raw numbers, the GDP for 2025 is $40. On paper, the economy grew by 33%. It looks like a boom. The politicians are cheering, and the headlines are screaming about record growth. But wait, look at the baskets. Is there more food? No. The people still only have 10 loaves of bread to eat. They aren't richer, things are just more expensive. This is the trap of nominal GDP. Nominal GDP is the as-is number. It's calculated using current prices, the prices that are active in the market right now. It reflects both the quantity of goods produced and the prices of those goods. The problem is that nominal GDP can rise even if a country is producing less than it did the year before, simply because inflation pushed prices through the roof. It's an optical illusion of prosperity. To fix this, economists use a tool called real GDP. To calculate real GDP, we pick a base year, let's say 2024, and we lock those prices in place. When we look at 2025, we ignore the new $4 price tag. Instead, we use the old $3 price. 10 loaves times $3 equals $30. By using real GDP, we see the truth. The economy didn't actually grow at all. It stayed flat. Real GDP strips away the noise of inflation. It allows us to see if a country is actually becoming more productive, if it's building more cars, weaving more shirts, or writing more software, rather than just charging more for the same old stuff. This is why governments and central banks obsess over real GDP. If nominal GDP is rising but real GDP is stagnant, it's a red flag. It means the cost of living is climbing, but the actual standard of living is stuck in place. It's the difference between having a bigger number in your bank account and actually being able to buy a bigger house. In the game of global economics, real GDP is the only score that truly matters. Part 4. The Global Yardstick, PPP and Per Capita. When we talk about the world's biggest economies, we usually hear names like the United States, China, or Japan. These are the giants. But does being a giant mean your citizens are actually living well? Not necessarily. To understand the real quality of life, we have to slice the pie differently. GDP, per capita. Large countries versus rich people. Think about the difference between Indonesia and Singapore. Indonesia is a powerhouse. It's a massive archipelago with a GDP that crosses the $1 trillion mark. Singapore, by contrast, is a tiny red dot on the map. Its total economy is much smaller than Indonesia's. But if you walk the streets of Singapore and then walk the streets of Jakarta, you see a different story. This is why we use GDP per capita. We take that giant pie, the total GDP, and divide it by the number of people in the country. In Indonesia, that trillion-dollar pie is shared by nearly 280 million people. That leaves about $5,000 per person. In Singapore, a smaller pie is shared by only 6 million people. That leaves roughly $90,000 per person. GDP per capita tells us how much economic weight the average individual carries. It's the difference between a country being powerful on the world stage and its people being comfortable at home. A large country isn't always a rich country for the people living in it. Purchasing power parity, PPP. The reality of a dollar. But there's another layer to this, A dollar in New York City does not buy you the same life as a dollar in Hanoi. If I give you $100 in Manhattan, you might afford a decent dinner for two. If I give you that same $100 in Vietnam, you could likely live quite well for several days. This is where purchasing power parity, or PPP, comes in. Exchange rates can be wild. They fluctuate based on politics and trade. But PPP is about the stuff. It adjusts the numbers based on the local cost of living. It asks, how much does a basic basket of goods actually cost here? To make this easy to understand, economists often use the Big Mac index. A Big Mac is the same almost everywhere. It's made of the same bun, the same beef, and the same secret sauce. Yet in Switzerland, it might cost $7, while in India, a similar version might cost less than $3. If we only looked at nominal GDP, the Swiss person looks much richer. But through the lens of PPP, we see that the Indian consumer's money stretches further. Their lower income buys more local goods than you'd think. PPP levels the playing field. It translates every country's wealth into international dollars, allowing us to compare the actual standard of living, the true purchasing power of the people. Why we need both. So which number is right? The answer is both. If you want to know which country can afford the biggest military or the most massive infrastructure projects, look at the total nominal GDP. That is raw, global power. But if you want to know how well the average person eats, how good their housing is, and how much they can actually afford on the weekend, you look at GDP per capita, PPP. It's the difference between the size of the engine and how smooth the ride is for the passengers. To truly understand a nation, you have to look at both the scale and the quality. Because a big economy is worthless if the people inside it can't afford a loaf of bread. Part 5. The hidden sides of GDP. We've spent a lot of time talking about what GDP measures, but to be a true expert, you have to understand what it ignores. GDP is a powerful tool, but it's a blunt one. It's like a thermometer that tells you a patient's temperature, but completely misses the fact that they have a broken leg. First, let's look at the invisible economy. GDP only counts transactions that happen in the formal market. If you pay a mechanic $50 to fix your car, that's GDP. But if you spend all Saturday fixing the car yourself, that value is zero in the eyes of economists. The same goes for the massive amount of labor done at home, cooking, cleaning, and raising children. This is vital work that keeps society running, but because no money changes hands, GDP pretends it doesn't exist. Then there is the underground economy. In many developing nations, a huge portion of the population works in informal jobs. The street food vendor selling banh mi, the flea market trader, the person getting paid in cash for a side hustle. None of this is taxed, and none of it is tracked. In some countries, this shadow economy can be as large as 30 or 40% of the official GDP. But perhaps the most dangerous flaw is what GDP doesn't subtract. GDP counts bads as goods. Think about a massive oil spill in the ocean. The cleanup effort costs billions of dollars. Thousands of workers are hired, boats are rented, and equipment is bought. Paradoxically, the oil spill actually increases GDP because of all that spending. The destruction of the environment is ignored. Only the cost of the cleanup is counted. GDP measures the throb of activity, not whether that activity is actually good for the world. And then there is the issue of distortion. Take Ireland, for example. For years, Ireland's GDP growth looked like a miracle, sometimes growing by 25% in a single year. Was every Irish citizen suddenly 25% richer? Not at all. Ireland is a tax haven. Huge multinational corporations move their intellectual property to Irish offices to pay lower taxes. The money flows through Irish bank accounts on paper, inflating the GDP, but the actual wealth doesn't stay in the local communities. It's a leprechaun economy. Finally, GDP tells us nothing about inequality. You can have a country with a sky-high GDP per capita where almost everyone is still living in poverty. Look at Equatorial Guinea. It has a massive oil wealth that makes its GDP per capita look like a wealthy European nation. But the reality is that the vast majority of that wealth is held by a tiny elite. The average person on the street sees almost none of it. GDP tells us how big the pie is. It doesn't tell us how the pie is sliced or if the pie was made by destroying the kitchen. Part 6. The Blueprint for Growth. How does a country actually move the needle? If GDP is the scorecard, what is the game plan? For many developing nations, the journey begins with foreign direct investment, or FDI. Think of FDI as a shortcut. Instead of waiting decades to develop your own technology, you invite the world's giants to bring theirs to you. When a global tech company builds a factory in a developing nation, they aren't just bringing cash. They are bringing blueprints. They are bringing advanced machinery. They are bringing management systems. This is the springboard. It allows a country to leapfrog over old stages of industrialization and start producing at a world-class level almost overnight. But there is a catch. FDI is only the fuel. To keep the engine running, you need a high-quality, absorptive capacity. In plain English, you need an educated workforce. You can bring the most advanced robotic arms in the world to a factory, but if the local workers don't have the technical training to maintain them, the growth will stall. This is the secret of the Asian tigers: South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and Hong Kong. In the 1960s, these were poor, struggling nations. Their strategy was simple but brutal: invest every spare cent into education and infrastructure. They started by making simple things: socks, toys, textiles. But they didn't stop there. They used the profits to send their children to the best universities. They turned their imitation phase into an innovation phase. We see this same story unfolding today in countries like Vietnam. It begins with becoming a manufacturing hub for the world. But the ultimate goal isn't just to be a factory, it's to become a creator. It's the journey from being the hands of the world to being the brain. Conclusion. At the end of the day, we must remember one thing. GDP is a tool. It is a powerful way to measure the size of our collective effort. It helps us understand where we are and where we are going. But GDP is not the same thing as well-being. It doesn't measure the quality of our air, the strength of our communities, or the happiness of our children. A high GDP can build a massive skyscraper, but it cannot guarantee that the people inside it are living a meaningful life. Understand the numbers, but never mistake the map for the territory. Thank you for listening. If you found this deep dive into the world of finance helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel. And I want to hear from you. Which country's economic journey surprises you the most? Drop a comment below, and let's keep the conversation going.